When Windows starts up, what it does is it puts up a thing called the splash screen that says Windows, you know, the name of it, usually a picture of the four sections or whatever. And then in the background, it loads the kernel, it loads drivers, it loads configuration files, it mounts drives, it does all sorts of stuff, including network connections. And then it takes away the splash screen and it gives you Explorer. The last time I did this, I talked about Explorer and how important the Explorer program is. And it was only at that point that you get given Explorer, once Windows had done all its startup. Now, there's a wee tip here, a wee trick, that if you were debugging somebody's machine and it was taking a long, long time to start up, you know, it was hanging in the splash screen for a long time. Very often what it was it was trying to connect to a network share that was no longer there. Typically a printer, or you know, they had a printer that was network connected, and then the printer had died and got flung out, but their PC was still trying to connect to the network printer. And so it tried to phone it half a dozen times, and every time it phoned it, nothing happened. And that was all time extending the startup time of the PC. So that was fine. And then at about Windows 7, Microsoft decided to be cute. What they were going to do was let some of the drivers and stuff like that start up once it had given the user Explorer. So it loaded the basics and then it took the splash screen away and gave you Explorer, so you could then move your mouse and keyboard and all that good stuff, but it was still doing work in the background. But those things it's still doing that. And those things that are working in the background can take quite a bit of resources. Some of the Microsoft stuff, Microsoft checks for updates, and it does Microsoft telemetry back to Microsoft to tell them what you're doing and so on like that. And then there's other programs like G Drive and Dropbox and people like that phone home. And as soon as the machine starts up, they pile in hard. Remember we talked about task scheduling, and these things are in the task scheduler to start as soon as the machine starts. So they pile in, and at that point your machine is busy. So you switch the machine on, and for the first 5 minutes, it seems to be really, really, really sluggish. You just kind of get on because of this startup routine. But there's a Chinese saying that I've just made up, that every problem brings an opportunity in its pocket. And this is exactly the same, this network thing, whereby all the network stuff piles in hard and that slows things up, but it also gives you an opportunity. Because nowadays, all us, we're all old farts, we're still using laptops and grandpa boxes, but the young kids, they don't do that anymore. They all use phones. And the other thing that they don't have that we've got is landlines. A lot of people do it now with their mobile phone, and they share the network round about, they share the connections round about the house to the mobile phone, and the mobile phone connects to the internet, and that's how it's done. Whereas probably most of us still connect via a router to a landline to the internet. But if you've got a mobile phone connection like that, you've also got this other wonderful thing called a data plan, which means that every byte that goes in and out your network gets metered and gets paid for. And for that reason, Microsoft have worked out that, wait a minute, that's maybe not a good thing. You're going to end up paying a fortune to get using our Windows. So they've invented this thing called metered connections, which gets me to the actual tip. If you tell your computer that it's on a metered connection, then it won't contact Microsoft with the telemetry. It won't contact Microsoft for updates. It won't contact Gmail. All that network heavy, busy stuff at the start simply won't happen. So if you bring your machine up and you want to get on, then what you do is you bring it up metered. Even though it's not metered, you tell it that it is metered. And in that way, the machine runs as if it had a network connection that it wasn't, it's trying to not use. And so it becomes much quicker, much much more responsive. That's a good point. The downside, obviously, is you lose those services. You don't get updates. You don't get Microsoft telemetry. So Microsoft don't get to see what porn sites you've been at. Never mind, forget that. You don't get the telemetry. You don't get the updates. All of that stuff you lose. But you only lose it until you switch the metering off again. So what I'm going to do now is minimize ULOT, share my screen, and there we go. Down here, there's the notification area. And if I go to my network, there we are, there's my network connection. In the network connection is a thing called properties. If I go into the properties, I can tell it that it's a metered connection. Now, if I set it as a metered connection, then what's going to happen is there's going to be very little network traffic going into or out of this machine. And suddenly the machine will start so much more quickly. And it'll still work. It'll still use the network. If I want to connect to the internet or something, it'll still do that happily.